It's really quite something when you think about it, how something seemingly small, maybe a local policy in one country's justice system, um, like how they handle a child's testimony in an abuse case,
Hmm.
how that can just ripple outwards. It can end up shaping national policy, get picked up by international aid groups, and, well, fundamentally change lives way beyond its starting point.
Absolutely. It speaks volumes about how interconnected things really are.
Exactly. And that interconnectedness, that ripple effect, is precisely what we're getting into today. We are doing a deep dive into the really complex story of Dr. Mónica P. Velandia. She's a Colombian psychologist, and her methods for evaluating children in forensic settings, well, they became incredibly widespread before hitting some serious scrutiny.
Yeah.
So our mission here is to unpack that influence, look at the institutional networks that amplified her work, and critically examine the consequences. What happens when psychological tools that haven't really been validated get woven into the fabric of justice systems, locally and, as we'll see, internationally?
It's a huge question. And a key takeaway, even up front, is how crucial that independent scientific validation is. Good intentions alone, as we'll explore, sometimes aren't enough.
Right.
And to piece this together, we've looked at quite a range of materials. We've got legal case records, reports from institutions involved, academic articles commenting on the situation, and even studies looking at systemic behavioral patterns.
So not just one perspective.
No, definitely not. These sources together, they paint a picture showing both the positive drive initially, the desire to help, but also these unforeseen and frankly damaging outcomes that emerged later on. It's a lesson in vigilance, really.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. Dr. Vejarano, who is she, essentially?
So she's a Colombian psychologist. Her background is in family and child therapy. And back in 1998, she founded an NGO in Bogota called Asociación Creemos en Ti, which translates to We Believe in You, ACET for short.
ACC, got it.
And she really made a name for herself developing these methods for interviewing child victims of abuse. She became quite prominent in that specific area.
And ACED's main goal was therapy, right?
Yay.
Helping kids who'd been abused.
Exactly. Specialized psychological care, that was their stated mission. It wasn't set up to be a forensic assessment body, not officially.
Why?
But it became an official partner within Colombia's child protection system. Critically, it was contracted by the Colombian Family Welfare Institute, the ICBF, for several years, from about 2003 to 2009.
Ah, okay.
So even though ACET wasn't technically charged with doing forensic psychological assessments, in practice, ACET and Dr. Vejarano herself, they became the go-to experts for prosecutors, for family courts.
So those lines between therapy and forensic evaluation started blurring pretty early on.
Very much so. It's a key part of how this all unfolds.
And then there was the protocol, the AC protocol, published in 2007. Tell us about that.
Right. The Clinical Forensic Interview Protocol for Child Victims of Sexual Abuse. On paper, its aims were, well, commendable, things like making kids feel comfortable, creating a less intimidating and non-authoritarian atmosphere.
Which sounds good.
Yeah, and empowering children to push back against what they termed disorienting prompts from interviewers. It even cited established research suggesting, a relaxed interviewer gets more reliable information from kids.
Okay, so it seemed grounded in some accepted ideas.
It drew from them, yes.
Oh.
But, and this is the crucial caveat, the protocol itself was developed internally at AC. It was proprietary.
Meaning they owned it, kept it in-house.
Exactly. And critically, it was not formally validated or recognized by professional oversight bodies in Colombia.
Wow. Okay, so the core method being used in legal context didn't have that external, independent scientific stamp of approval.
Precisely. And that lack of independent validation becomes a central issue down the line. It's pretty standard, for evidence used in court to have undergone that kind of rigorous checking.
That really is a significant detail. So how did this protocol, developed by one NGO and not officially validated, manage to spread so widely? It sounds like it really took hold.
It did. And the answer lies largely in Dr. Vejarano's skill at leveraging networks. Professional connections, academic partnerships, especially a significant one with Florida International University, FIU.
FIU in the U.S.
That's right. These collaborations were often funded by USII and explicitly aimed at reforming the justice sector. This gave her and her methods a huge platform.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Between 2004 and 2006, there was this community child abuse prevention strategy, a pilot project involving ACET, FIU, and the ICBF. It was successful enough that it became a national model for ICBF.
So embedding it within the system.
Exactly. And then, maybe even more directly impacting court practice, from 2009 to 2010, she was the lead trainer for a program focused on Casas de Justicia. These are like community justice centers.
All right.
She traveled to at least 10 different municipalities, training judges, prosecutors, police officers, social workers, all on child forensic evaluations, supporting child witnesses, coordinating agency responses.
Wow, that's extensive reach.
It was. And many of those Casas de Justicia then institutionalized the practices she taught. We're talking something like 156 child forensic interviews per month being done using these approaches, plus therapy for around 130 families.
So it wasn't just theory, it became standard operating procedure in those places.
Pretty much. And her influence went higher, too. Between 2007 and 2012, she was advising major bodies like the International Organization for Migration and the Attorney General's Office on setting up specialized sexual crimes unit.
Which should standardize things nationwide.
Right. It helps standardize how prosecutors handle child sexual abuse cases nationwide. And her influence hasn't entirely faded. Even now, in 2024, she's consulting for the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, the JEP.
So this whole web, really, of programs, training positions, advisory roles, combined with the legitimacy that comes from, say, partnering with a U.S. university like FIU, that's how an in-house NGO practice essentially became a de facto standard across courts, child protection agencies, police training.
That's exactly it. It just permeated the system, step by step, program by program.
But there's that inherent tension you mentioned earlier. ACEIT was therapeutic, but it ended up doing quasi-judicial work.
Precisely. And local prosecutors and judges, perhaps lacking other readily available expertise or resources, started treating ACEIT's reports almost like definitive proof, like a rubber stamp for truthfulness, you could say.
Potentially skipping over stricter forensic standards that might normally apply.
Potentially, yes. And this influence wasn't just ACEIT itself. Other professionals picked up the believe the child ethos associated with her work, sometimes it seems uncritically.
So shifting from believe the child as a starting point for a proper investigation
to treating belief itself almost as proof, which is a really fundamental and, frankly, dangerous shift in a legal setting where proof requires rigorous, objective evidence.
Okay, so you have this widespread adoption, this blurring of lines, this potential bypassing of standards. It feels like it was only a matter of time before challenges arose.
And they did. By the mid-2010s, you start seeing serious pushback, both legally and scientifically. Defense lawyers, other forensic psychologists, they began questioning the validity of ACEIT's tools, especially in court.
Was there a specific focus for these challenges?
Yes, a lot of attention landed on something called the CET psychometric test.
A test they used in evaluations.
Correct. ACEIT claimed this test was endorsed by a Colombian university, Universidad de San Buenaventura, which would give it a layer of academic credibility.
Okay, but was it?
Well, according to investigators cited in our sources, no. They found that the test they had was a fraud and not endorsed. It was essentially unknown in the scientific community.
Wow. A fraud is strong language. What does a psychometric test usually require?
Rigorous independent validation. You need solid proof. It reliably measures what it claims to measure. And that validation wasn't there for the CET test, according to these findings.
And was ACEIT open about the test materials?
Apparently not always. There's an account from Ricardo Suarez, a respected Colombian forensic psychologist, who said, Dr. Vejarano refused to show him the test materials specifically because I worked for the defense.
That kind of secrecy. That doesn't exactly scream scientific confidence, does it?
Not at all. It raises immediate red flags about transparency, replicability, peer review, all the things that underpin valid science.
And the courts eventually weighed in on this.
They certainly did. There was a key case in Bogota in 2015. The judge made several pointed remarks, highlighted that the ACEIT protocol was not a protocol recognized by national or international associations.
Explicitly calling it out.
Yes, and saying this cast serious doubt on the veracity and soundness of the technique. The judge also noted procedural issues. The evaluator didn't have formal forensic credentials. The interview wasn't observed or recorded as might be standard, and they couldn't document the initial prompts that led to the child's statement.
And the outcome of that case.
The accused father was acquitted, partly because of these concerns about the ACEIT evaluation.
And this wasn't just a one-off.
No, sources suggest it became part of a pattern. Convictions started getting overturned on appeal when ACEIT's evaluations had been central to the original verdict.
Leading all the way to the top court.
Eventually, yes. Colombia's Supreme Court of Justice ultimately disqualified ACEIT from participating in sexual abuse cases. They criticized what they called the pseudo-scientific nature of its theories.
Pseudoscientific meaning it looks like science, but lacks the rigor.
Exactly. Lacks the evidence base, the validation, the peer review. The court cautioned strongly against basing convictions solely on psychological reports that weren't corroborated by other evidence.
Beyond the courts, was there other fallout, ethically or legally?
Yes, there was. Columbia's Psychology Ethics Tribunal reportedly disciplined AC in some way, admonished them.
Okay.
And more seriously, criminal complaints, denuncias penales, were filed. These alleged things like false testimony or fraudulent reports.
So actual criminal accusations against individuals involved.
That's what the sources indicate, yes. And practically speaking, prosecutors in some areas just stopped using ACET staff as expert witnesses.
So the core scientific criticism boiled down to?
It boiled down to ACET evaluations, mixing up therapy with fact-finding. This creates a huge risk of confirmation bias, where you unconsciously look for information that confirms your existing belief.
Right, you see what you expect to see.
Precisely. And that motto, Creer and T, believe in you. While obviously coming from a place of wanting to support children, it became problematic in this context if it meant just assuming allegations were true without rigorous, objective examination.
It's a difficult line to walk.
Extremely. And Ricardo Suarez, the psychologist I mentioned, put it very starkly. He argued that many innocent defendants ended up in jail for years due to ACET's evaluation and were later absolved. And conversely, he claimed many children were made into victims without actually being so.
That's a devastating assessment. It's worth noting, though, not everyone attributed bad intentions to Dr. Vejarano herself, right?
Correct. Many critiques acknowledge her genuine commitment to protecting children. The issue wasn't necessarily seen as malice, but perhaps a lack of scientific rigor, maybe getting caught up in the mission.
Which shifts the focus a bit, doesn't it, towards the system itself?
It absolutely does. You have to ask. What were the systemic failures that allowed this to happen on such a scale? Why weren't these methods vetted more thoroughly earlier?
So, bodies like the ICBF, the prosecutors, they were potentially delegating critical work without enough oversight.
It seems that way, perhaps driven by a desperate need for resources and expertise in a very difficult area. They relied on ACET without sufficiently auditing the methods being used.
And the international partners like FIU or USAS?
Their focus was capacity building, which is laudable, but maybe in focusing on building capacity, they didn't sufficiently scrutinize the scientific rigor of the content being delivered through these local partnerships.
So everyone had a role, perhaps unintentionally, in allowing techniques that weren't fully validated to be presented almost like established science.
Yeah, it allowed confirmation bias and ad hoc techniques to masquerade as science, as one source puts it, for quite some time before the legal challenges really brought it to light.
So effectively, Columbia ended up with this sort of parallel system for forensic evaluation. You had the official state forensic institutes, but also this NGO operating alongside them, maybe without the same checks and balances.
That's a good way to put it. An outsourced function, but without the necessary quality control built in.
And this links back to the international dimension you mentioned earlier with FIU.
It does, because FIU's involvement, while likely well-intentioned, lent this American academic prestige to the local practices, but it also, perhaps inadvertently, helps circulate the same institutional blind spots across borders.
How so?
Well, think about what the systemic behavioral reports say. They point out that institutions are linked, right? So a flaw in one node can propagate widely.
Like a virus in a network.
Sort of. A biased theory published somewhere, or a flawed practice adopted in one place, can inform practice elsewhere, especially when packaged within these international cooperation projects. Dysfunctional norms don't stay local, the reports warn.
And Dr. Vejarano's protocol became one of those packages.
Exactly. It was embedded within these child protection programs, carrying FIU's imprimatur and spread that way.
It's fascinating and slightly disturbing to think about parallels. You mentioned FIU's home state, Florida. There was research there about police hiring, wasn't there?
Yes, quite striking research. It found a systemic failure in detecting manipulative, coercive behaviors during police recruitment.
Why?
Because the standard psychological exams were often too narrow. They missed key indicators. The estimate was that maybe 5 to 8% of officers in some forces could exhibit traits like abusive manipulation, using Darview tactics, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender, or significant narcissistic traits.
And the screening just wasn't catching it.
Right. The blind spots in the screening process led it through.
So the connection you're drawing is?
The connection is about exporting blind spots. If the assessment practices within an institution, whether it's police screening in Florida or psychological evaluation training in Colombia, if those practices lack certain safeguards, like trauma-informed approaches or robust accountability.
Then those weaknesses get exported along with the program.
Exactly. In the Colombian case, the blind spot was the failure to rigorously verify the science behind the tools being promoted. And that blind spot got amplified and legitimized through the international network. It created this feedback loop of negligence, where a local flaw gained international backing, making it much harder to question until real harm was done.
The harm, the human cost. We need to talk about that. It wasn't just theoretical.
No, absolutely not. There are documented cases, children removed from parents, kids put into intensive therapy based on assessments that were later heavily questioned or discredited.
You mentioned an example earlier, something about a dream.
Yes, an absolutely egregious example cited in the sources. An accusation apparently originated from a mother having a dream that her neighbor had abused her child.
A dream.
A dream! Yet somehow an ICBF psychologist reportedly validated the child's story based on this, testified in court, and it contributed to a conviction, which, thankfully, was later overturned.
That's staggering. Imagine being that child, being told you were a victim based on someone else's dream.
The psychological damage is immense. You have mental health interventions predicated on a potentially false premise. This risks, as sources suggest, effectively planting false memories or exaggerated fears.
Like Suarez said, turning a child who wasn't a victim into a victim through the process itself.
Precisely, causing grave harm, as he put it. And think about the flip side. When actual victims have their cases mishandled by unscientific methods, what does that do?
It must be devastating. A betrayal.
It inflicts a second trauma. It teaches survivors that the system doesn't work, that the truth can be twisted, even by those supposedly there to help. It erodes trust at the deepest level.
And beyond the individuals directly involved, what are the wider societal ripples of this kind of systemic issue?
Well, think about the long term. If children grow up in an environment where psychological assessments related to justice can be flawed or manipulated, what do they learn?
Maybe that truth is relative, that manipulation works.
Possibly. They might learn that manipulation and deception can triumph, leading either to cynicism about institutions or perhaps even adopting those tactics themselves later in life.
And that has implications for the integrity of professions, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It risks normalizing pathological behaviors and undermining labor force integrity in crucial fields: law, social work, psychology itself, law enforcement.
If professionals are trained, even implicitly, to prioritize a certain narrative or ideology over rigorous, objective science,
it compromises the quality of these professionals, potentially creating a vicious cycle where flawed practices perpetuate themselves.
and ultimately, public trust just plummets.
Yes. People become wary of experts, even genuine ones. Real victims might hesitate to come forward, fearing disbelief or mishandling. Communities might doubt professionals across the board, even when they're doing excellent evidence-based work. It's corrosive.
When you lay it all out, the story of Dr. Vejarano and ACT really is a powerful cautionary tale, isn't it? About the potential, but also the real peril of expertise in psychology when it's not properly checked.
It really is.
Her work clearly aimed to fill huge gaps in how Colombian institutions supported abused children, bringing empathy, focus where maybe there wasn't enough before.
Undeniably, the initial intent seems clear.
But those good intentions that drive somehow got subverted by a lack of scientific vigilance.
Yeah.
It really does give you pause.
And it offers some critical lessons moving forward, surely.
Such as?
Well, the need for robust checks and balances seems obvious. Agencies like ICBF, when partnering with external groups, must rigorously vet the methodologies being used. They can't just assume expertise.
And the courts.
Courts have a huge role. They need to demand transparency. They need to insist on proper validation for any expert evidence presented, especially in such high-stakes cases.
And the international partners. FIU's the US 80s.
They need to be mindful, too. Capacity building is vital, but they have to ensure they're not inadvertently amplifying or legitimizing unproven, unvalidated theories or practices alongside the helpful stuff. Due diligence is key.
It brings us right back to where we started, that interconnectedness. These feedback loops between psychological ideas, institutional practices, and ultimately the health of a society.
As those reports highlighted, a flaw in one node can propagate widely.
And dysfunctional norms don't stay local. They can travel packaged up in seemingly helpful initiatives.
It's a sobering thought, which maybe leads to a final point for you, our listeners, to mull over.
Go on.
How can we as societies, as institutions, maybe even just as individuals, develop a stronger immunity to corrupted expertise?
Yeah.
How do we get better at spotting when something presented as science isn't?
What role does critical thinking play? Questioning things, even when they come from celebrated figures or prestigious institutions.
Exactly. And prioritizing verifiable science, demanding that evidence, especially when people's lives and futures are on the line. How do we build that into the system and into our own thinking to better ensure justice and well-being in this incredibly interconnected world we live in?